What's up, Steelers fans? Welcome back to Around the Burgh. We're back with our recap of the third preseason game. Another victory against the Lions, 26-20. We're going to recap everything that went down in the game, including huge performances from multiple starters for the year, and maybe even get into a little bit of a preview of the final preseason game and what we expect to see for the rest of this preseason. But first, I'll introduce my co-host, Shayne Kubas. Shayne, how you doing today?
Again, always happy to come back here with a win, right? Talk about that.
100%. All right. So we'll jump right into it. We talked the last few weeks about how the games were pretty similar in terms of the Steelers would kind of start slowly. The other team would get out to a lead and the Steelers would come back using their depth, especially at quarterback. This week, that was flipped on its head in that the Steelers came out with almost all of their starters. They built a very big lead in the first part of the game, and then slowly but surely the other team whittled that lead away, but eventually the Steelers did prevail. The Lions put together a pretty nice effort in the third and fourth quarters to get it back to being a game, but eventually the Steelers were able to shut them down and close out the game. So Shayne, what were your kind of overall thoughts of how the game went in the first time we saw a lot of the starters on both sides of the ball?
It was definitely nice to see the offensive line play together for the first time, for the most part. I unfortunately I don't know if we'll really get to see much more of that next week. I don't anticipate them getting a lot of runs. So, getting to see it at least once before the regular season makes me feel, I guess, a little bit better.
Right.
And also seeing Ben out there, the fact he wanted to play, he wanted to get out there and get a feel for what he's doing with the new offense was really nice to see. And luckily, as we saw, regardless of who he's playing against, he looked fantastic, at least as far as his command of what he's trying to do, what the offense wants to do, and just very sharp for the entire game.
Yeah, that was the thing that I kind of noticed was the theme running through at least the part that he played was that the Steelers offense was able to create explosive opportunities. So they only punted once in the whole game, which, if because of an Eric Ebron drop, if Eric Ebron completes that catch, that's a big explosive play.
Yeah.
The next two drives, Ben hits a bomb to Deontay Johnson for 40 plus yards. The next drive after that, they hit Najee underneath and he takes it for another 40-yard gain, which was a really fun play to watch.
Yeah, it was.
So, that's something that I said that the Steelers were missing last year was that ability to create explosive plays, both by attacking vertically and by, just getting players to create after the catch. And I definitely agree with you on the offensive line. I mean, we saw the guys on the left side play for most of the game. So Chooks, Kevin Dotson, and Kendrick Green all played 48 snaps. Trey Turner and Zach Banner came out pretty early.
Yeah.
We also saw Dan Moore get a lot of run at both tackle spots, actually.
Yeah.
So that's really good to see from him. He had another pretty solid game. I saw a stat from PFF that he's the only player in the preseason to have like X amount of, I think he has the most snaps without a pressure because he has 62 snaps and has no pressures allowed, which is pretty impressive.
He's been good.
Obviously, probably the biggest story besides Ben's return, which we talked about, is the performance of the rookies. We mentioned Najee Harris, but this was the Pat Freiermuth game.
It was, yes.
I think will be known as that forever moving forward.
Yeah.
So Freiermuth catches 2 touchdowns in the red zone from Ben early in the game. Excuse me. What did you think of Freiermuth in his first outing, or at least like real outing with the starters?
I think that we found what his best opportunity to have a role in the offense is going to be, which we kind of expected was going to be that red zone target. His just ability to catch the football, like he always talks about, I don't drop the football in the red zone, right? If he can do that, if nothing else, I do think he's going to get, especially if Ebron doesn't, perk up a little bit here. He could get more and more run as a full-time starter at times, and he might get more, touches outside of the red zone. But if nothing else, he looks like he's going to be a huge weapon for Ben as a safety net in the red zone where he can just throw it up to him, make sure that he gives him a chance, and he's going to come down with it most times. And that's really nice.
The Eric Ebron giveth and the Eric Ebron taketh away.
Right.
Exactly. He has that big drop. The next, a few drives later, he comes back with a nice deep over route.
Yeah.
So
he's
consistent. But I definitely think you're right that Freiermuth is going to be Ben's probably one of his favorite targets in the red zone because he offers that height and size that not many other players besides Chase Claypool offer.
Right.
And, Ben has always been a big fan of that tight end in the red zone. I think of Heath Miller for all those years, even Vance McDonald. And apparently Freiermuth took McDonald's locker next to Ben. So you can kind of see how they're going to be developing that relationship.
Yeah.
I think I want to point out at least one negative, though. I think we saw the run game struggle a little bit. And again, like you said, like this was the first time we saw the offensive line all playing together. And even then, it was only really 1 or 1.5 drives of all 5 starters being on the field together.
Mhm.
So what did you think of what you saw from the run game and maybe like what they can improve on, at least from now until week 1 of the regular season?
I think the biggest thing is there was a few times where they gave it with Najee on the game, especially. There was a few plays where those negative plays happened where he just had nothing like he could do. It wasn't
Yeah,
one of
for
those
sure.
things where, oh well, he danced around or whatever. Like he literally just from the get go pretty much had nowhere to go.
Mhm.
That is the stuff we need to try to avoid. We don't need to give him a ton of space. We don't need to give him even a ton of push every snap for him to be effective. We just
Mhm.
can't let him get hit in the backfield that much. Like that's the biggest concern I have with the run game is limiting those specific types of moments. If they don't get if they're not a great run blocking unit, I think we can still succeed as a running team. It just can't be giving up negative plays like that because that sets back drives, makes Ben less likely to be comfortable, running play action if they're not as worried about the run game being effective. All that ties together, and I don't want that to become a consistent issue for sure.
Yeah, and I think overall we saw the run game struggle. There was only 27 rushing attempts for 78 yards, just
Yeah.
under 3.5, just under 3 yards per carry, and only 2 rushing first downs. I think the other side of that though is that I think we have to accept that Kalen Ballage is going to make this roster.
I wanted to talk about him.
Yeah.
The thing that I like that he does so far in the preseason is even though he's really been more of like an athlete than anything else so far in his career,
Mhm.
and that's kind of what his projection was coming out of college was he's an athletic, one cut type of guy. He's just putting his head down once he finds somewhere to go and just gets 3 to 4 yards. And
Mhm.
honestly, if he can do that and have the upside of maybe if there's a hole, he could break through it and actually score with it, opposed to like a Benny Snell. Unfortunately for him, he's the guy that's on the outside looking in. And so is Jalen Samuels.
Yeah.
He at least if he can be that guy that can get you 3 to 4 yards when you need it, on top of having more potential as a receiver and as a actual guy that can take something to the house, he has to make the roster as a third guy. Like he just has to.
Yeah, I mean, I think Benny Snell still has a shot just because I think the
Yeah.
coaching staff really likes him. He's pretty early
Right.
on his rookie deal, but Jalen Samuels really struggled even in the latter part of the game last night.
Mhm.
And he's not really offering a ton of value on special teams either. So
Right.
I think you're right. I think he's on the outside looking in. The other person I think we should talk about, at least on the offensive side, is Mason Rudolph. So
Mhm.
we saw a lot of Mason this game. And for the most part, he looked really good. He led a lot of long drives, looked efficient, made good decisions, converted third downs, but the red zone really plagued him.
Yeah.
I don't think they didn't score any touchdowns with him. They converted a lot of field goals, but a lot of issues for Mason. Can you walk us through like what you saw from Mason in the red zone and maybe like what issues you saw and maybe like how they can fix them if they need to moving forward?
I think with Mason, like again, he put in a performance that's typical for him, which is fine. He did well on, like you said, some of the third down plays. There was the one miss that he got away with because of the face
Mm-hmm.
mask.
Mm-hmm.
That was definitely a missed throw. I mean, Johnson was
Yeah.
wide open essentially on that out
Mm-hmm.
route.
Yeah.
So that was a tough miss, but it wasn't an egregious miss. It was just a little too high. And then the sack on the pressure that he ended up he did end up.
Hey,
trying to
listen,
run
that
through
wasn't a
guy.
sack. I don't know what you're talking about. He got a yard.
Right. Exactly. I mean, I do give him credit for just bowling forward.
Yeah.
Like you could tell he knows that he has to fight to
Mhm.
keep his spot, right?
Yeah.
Regardless of what anyone tries to tell you, whatever, he understands that Haskins is breathing down his neck, and
Mhm.
you can tell that he's trying to, make his spot be clear on the team.
Right.
So I do give him credit for that. But the red zone struggles, I think part of it is just, again, he's not a tight window. Like he's never going to be a guy that's going to complete those very difficult passes consistently. And when you get down in the red zone, unless you have guys separating early in routes, or you have guys that can, break free the last second, give him a clear window to throw, he's not the type of guy that's going to fit those tough throws in. So it's tough for him if that's not happening in the red zone.
Yeah, for sure. I think that we saw. So the thing we've always talked about with Mason is that he struggles with like this post snap processing and being able to kind of adjust to what the defense is doing. And I honestly think the play calling didn't do him a ton of favors when they were in the red zone because
really.
They were all very like, you need to sit in the pocket, go through your reads and find the open man and get it in there. And that's, that's what you do have to do as a starting NFL quarterback, but that's something he still struggles with.
Yeah,
so
that's not his game. Really.
Yeah, I still think they could have maybe called some better plays for him. Maybe they're trying to say like, hey, can you convert these please? And he wasn't able to do it. So that's disappointing. But I think that if, in a real game situation, they would call some maybe more helpful plays for him. In terms of Haskins, sure. I think I really only remember 2 plays. There was one where he scrambled for a pretty decent amount of yardage, which was nice to see again, something we've talked about a lot with him. And then there was another play, which was just an incompletion, but he sailed it really far. The receiver was like, oh, that's a nice throw. But other than that, it was mostly kind of late game garbage time. They were just trying
Right.
to grind out the clock. Anything else on the offense that popped out to you in this game?
I will say there was a couple plays from unfortunately at Corafor, who that touchdown, the second touchdown to Frymouth, he got bodied on that play. Like Ben just got that ball away.
Yes, yeah.
And like that's especially because it wasn't like Ben was in the pocket super long really on that play. And again with him, that's why as much as I didn't love the pick of Moore, he's shown a lot more than I expected him to, pun intended. And and he might have a chance, if not the start of the season, not long into it, he might get inserted at that left tackle spot if Corafor can't pass protect well. Because that's the only thing we know that he could possibly be better with is his pass protection, because he's not a great run blocker. I don't really know how much more would help with that, but it doesn't really matter if Corafor is not going to be an average pass blocker, because I think Moore could at least be that from what we've seen.
Right. So Shayne is obviously selling his stock on Chukwuma Okorafor.
A little bit at this point.
He knew it was coming. Anyways,
I knew it was coming. Yeah.
Symbol is the stock market for sports where you can buy and sell virtual shares of your favorite teams using real money. Every time your team wins, you earn a win payout. If your team loses, you lose nothing. Symbol offers trading for the NFL, NBA, and MLB, with college football coming this fall. Visit https://symbol.app/today and use promo code SteelersATB to earn a $10 deposit bonus on your first deposit. That's https://simbull.app. All right. So with that out of the way, we're going to move on talking about the defense. Shayne, what did you see from the defense, both early in the game where we saw a lot of the starters and late in the game when they started to come out off the field?
I think early on you saw the pass rush was definitely an issue for the Lions. Highsmith continues to just put on a clinic in the preseason. He hasn't always played against starters, but he just looks so much better than the guys he's going up against every week.
Yeah.
And you could tell that he's ready to cement himself as a permanent starter on that side. And then having Melvin Ingram still as like, come on.
Yeah.
Like that run play he blew up, like that guy's on the bench technically, essentially. Like he's at this point, he's a bench player. That's stupid.
Yeah.
Having him is like, oh, Highsmith maybe needs a break, or maybe he's not doing a great job against this matchup. Let's just throw Melvin Ingram out. It's like, what are you like?
Yeah.
As an offense, I'd be like, we got to be. I mean, TJ Watt's his own beast. We don't have to talk about him. And then if Highsmith looks anywhere as good as he had, like anything like he's looked in the preseason, regular season, that's going to be a problem. Because I mean, you just deal with him all game, and then if he gets tired, or if we just want to go three, rushers out there, you throw Ingram out there. It's hard. Like it's just hard to deal with.
Yeah, I think the only thing we have to caveat is saying obviously the Lions weren't playing a lot of their starters.
Right.
A lot of times I was even struggling to say, okay, wait, who's playing for them in this quote starting lineup? Like I didn't figure out the quarterback until maybe the third drive. But there were multiple plays where we saw, obviously, like you said, Alex Highsmith and Melvin Ingram just dominating their opponents. Penny Sewell got his lunch handed to him a few times.
He did.
Which
He's
is
a rookie,
not,
but still.
Yeah. The thing that I was more concerned about was you talked about like the on-ball linebackers. I'm going to talk about the off-ball ones,
right.
in Devin Bush and Joe Schobert, who this was their first game playing together, and it was not perfect. They had some decent plays. They had some struggles. Joe Schobert had a few times where he kind of got dragged physically as a linebacker trying to make a tackle. So that's not ideal. But I think this is something that, again, it's going to kind of get better with time. I think the Steelers were running they're struggling in vanilla defense. So you could say that's concerning, but it's their first action together. They've got some time. So hopefully that's something they can improve on. And like we were saying, like the Steelers only had two starters out, and Stephon Tuitt, who's dealing with the loss of his tragic loss of his brother, and TJ Watt, who's still holding out with this contract dispute. But I think both of them will be back when week one comes. So not a lot to worry about there. Moving on from there, like we said earlier, like the defense kind of started to buckle multiple times into the late parts of the game when the Lions had their backups in. I remember David Blau from a few Thanksgivings ago. I did not remember him being this running threat.
He's an interesting guy, like, because he got that opportunity in Thanksgiving and obviously hasn't really done anything since then because he's, it's what it is. But yeah, I didn't expect him to use his legs as much as he did, because he didn't really show that at all at the time, I remember. So it's, I mean, he probably figured, hey, if no one else is going to do anything, I'll just do it myself. Right. But
yeah,
definitely fun watching him kind of run around out there and have a good time. It seemed like he was doing pretty well.
Yeah. And the Steelers were able to get home a few times.
Yeah.
on him, but then he would kind of spin out and make a play. The Lions running game was also pretty successful later in the game, which was concerning given the fact that they had a converted defensive back and a street free agent as their running backs against. And I think the run defense is something that we've mentioned a few times throughout this preseason as being concerning early on. I think part of that is going to be assuaged. Obviously, these are backups, but for the starters, that'll be assuaged by having everevery starting and everybody healthy.
Right. If a fully healthy defense, I'm not too worried about
exactly
running game. So.
I'm very, even though Joe Sherbert wasn't perfect, I am just very thankful that they did get him because Robert Spillane has had arguably the worst preseason of any player on this team.
It's too bad. I mean, obviously we knew that he wasn't this great talent. He just really did a pretty good job filling in when he had to, but it is disappointing to see a guy who had a chance to play so much last year just kind of not continue on with it. And obviously he probably makes the team still, obviously, but the fact that we don't have to rely on him to be the second linebacker is huge at this point because, like you said, it's not been great to watch him out there. Hopefully Schobert can at least. My thing with him is if he can at least hold up in the run game a little bit. Like you said, he was getting dragged a little bit. Mm-hmm. He is just now getting onto the team. Hopefully he can kind of figure things out.
Yeah.
As long as he's not a huge liability as a run defender and Bush can kind of handle a lot of that, I think that it's still going to work out fine. Though.
Yeah. And Spillane, I think, he caught lightning in a bottle for a little bit. And I think Kevin Colbert and the coach staff might have identified these problems in training camp prior to these preseason games. Like, okay, we need to be on the lookout for somebody. And then they went and got him with Joe Schobert. Some other kind of news and notes, a lot of struggles in the defensive backfield, especially late in the game. I'm still very skeptical on James Pierre. Apparently he's had an excellent training camp, but the results on the field have not reflected that, in my opinion. Like you said, like he's playing a lot of off coverage. He might be asked to press more. That might be helpful to him, but still, and the Lions obviously do not have the deepest receiving core to begin with, and he was getting regularly beaten. And I'm very concerned about that corner 2 spot.
It is tough because, like you said, in camp against our receivers, backups and not, he seems to have done very well. And I don't know if it's just, like I said, I don't think they're really deploying him in his best role, but at the same time, they must know that that's not his best role.
Yeah.
So it's weird. It's almost feels like, I don't know if they want to just get a look at him playing that more. And obviously if they are trying to do that, they know that they probably shouldn't be using him in that way.
Yeah.
Or if it is just that it's just like this night and day situation. I hope that he does enough. It shows them enough that they can at least rely on him to come on the field sometimes. So that way Sutton can match up against certain slot defenders, or slot receivers. It's going to be tough to see like how they deploy all the corners that they keep, because Sutton's going to probably have to play outside most of the time.
And the other problem is that a lot of the corners further down the roster are also not looking good. We saw Justin Lane have some really bad reps in terms of his tackling. His coverage seemed to be decent, but regularly getting physically dominated. And even Shakur Brown had about the worst last 2 drives anybody could have on in a preseason game, getting called for penalties, allowing some big plays. I think a lot of people liked him in terms of his special teams ability, and maybe playing some slot defender in the future. But man, this was a rough game for him.
It was, yeah. It's
the
tough.
Michigan State Spartans did not show out well last night.
No, they did not. But
all right, so we're gonna close it out with special teams because I think I tweeted this last night that there might not be a more improved unit on the Steelers, which is pretty surprising, than the special teams, because obviously Boswell's doing great. And I forget who it was, but somebody tweeted out that in the first half, the snapping team was Christian Kuntz, who's a linebacker long snapper hybrid, and Presley Harvin is the holder. In the second half, it was Cameron Candidate, the traditional long snapper, and Jordan Berry's the holder. Obviously, Boswell's great, all clean exchanges from both parties. That's great to see. We saw one punt. Presley Harvin punted it inside the 20. It was returned for 3 yards. Good punt. Kickoff coverage has been elite.
Yes.
We're seeing like Trey Norwood, Jameer Jones, Henry Mondo, a bunch of guys making tons of plays, which is great to see. And then my guy, Matthew Sexton, with a massive return from inside the 10, making things happen, which, I was very excited to see. I'm not sure he makes the roster, given that Raymond McLeod is probably entrenched as the punt returner, and he had some nice plays last night as well.
Yeah,
but
as an offensive player too.
They ran 2 of those kind of swing screen plays that I thought worked really well. But that was the highlight of my night, at least, seeing Matthew Sexton get a big play.
I mean, he could get, if he doesn't make the roster, which again, probably a big long shot, just because the top 5 receiver options are pretty much kind of set in stone at this point, minus a trade from Washington, which I don't think is going to happen at this point. So it's going to be tough for him. I mean, there is a possibility if a team needs a returner that, maybe if they're struggling at returner right now or somebody gets hurt, he might be one of the first guys that gets a call though, which would be nice for him.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see what they do at the back end of the receiver position, because obviously they have their 5 guys, Juju, Deontay, Chase Claypool, James Washington, and then Ray McLeod as kind of your slot punt returner, whatever have you. But that's 6 wide receiver spot, because the Steelers like to carry 6 receivers just in case somebody gets hurt, and they like to use that receiver on special teams. We saw Darius Hayward-Bay carry that role for a while, play really well there. And I'm interested to see, because Cody White has been playing really well as a receiver. He's making really good catches. He's doing great as a blocker. I haven't seen him very much on special teams. I think last night might have been his first time playing special teams, whereas Anthony Johnson, who I really liked as a draft prospect coming out, has been on special teams a ton. And he's another big body guy, makes, good vertical catch. We saw that against Philly. So I'm really intrigued to see who gets that 6 wide receiver hat.
It's going to be interesting, because if they do keep 6 receivers from the get-go, which I do think is very possible, it's going to probably, unfortunately for the guys that are, mostly receivers, that probably is going to come down to the special teams value, because realistically, if you're the 6th receiver, you don't expect to play unless it's on special teams, or at the end of the game. So you'd rather take a guy like, probably Johnson at this point that, brings true special teams value outside of returning, that he's going to be an asset from that perspective. And then you do trust him to come on the field if need be and be a receiver. So it's right now, if I had to pick one, I'm probably picking him.
See, I'm kind of wondering the opposite, in that I think they would have, they could be worried that Cody White could get snapped up off the practice squad.
That's true too.
And then you can protect players. I think you can protect up to 4.
Yeah, I think so.
With these new rules. But I'm wondering if they just have Johnson in the practice squad, because, teams have they usually carry their own practice squad wide receiver. So there's no sense in going out and getting somebody else's. And then, Cody White's your 6 wide receiver is usually a game day inactive unless somebody's
could
hurt.
Be. That's could be too.
But that's something I'm really interested to see. So, so we've got one preseason game left, our annual matchup with the Carolina Panthers. Who are some guys that you're looking for to, really either they have to kind of save their jobs this game, or they can really cement themselves as a person that's going to contribute on the roster, or just in general, which guys are you looking at in the final preseason game?
First of all, obviously we kind of know that in some capacity he's probably going to be on the team, but I want to see, do they give Dwayne Haskins the reins as a starter for this game and just let him run with it? Because Rudolph's gotten more snaps so far for good reason. Obviously he's the backup right now, but at this point, throw Haskins out there and let him play for 2.5, 3 quarters and just see what you have in him.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of we know what we have in Rudolph. There's not really much more we can learn, especially if he's playing against the Panthers backups. Let's see if Haskins can get some stuff done, and then Dobbs will come in, and he usually dices up the Panthers pretty well in preseason. So
he'll
go for 4-0 here.
It is interesting because Dobbs has had the best training camp of his career.
Yeah.
And but it's hard to talk about him because we kind of know it's not going to happen. I mean, hopefully someone maybe wants to pick him up and see what they have in him or whatever it is. But yeah, it is kind of unfortunate for him though.
I'm wondering if Tom, this is kind of morbid, but I'm wondering if Tomlin will pay some Panthers defender, hey, can you just step on his ACL so we can stash him on IR? Get him on the roster somehow, because I mean, obviously Ben loves him. We've seen clips of him kind of being a de facto QB coach. So
I could see him having a future in that for sure.
If he wasn't a rocket scientist, for sure.
Yeah, right. Except that he could probably do more good doing that. But at the same time, it is nice to have a guy like him on the roster, but it's just hard. Like you said, it's just hopefully some team does pick him up, as a late cut, maybe a late addition if they're not happy with their backup situation. But
any other names you're looking forward to, guys maybe on the back end of the roster who are trying to kind of cement their spot on the roster, or even just the practice squad?
I personally think that he's already done it, but Jameer Jones, we didn't talk much about him.
Yeah.
So I honestly think that at this point he needs to make the roster. Yeah. Because if nothing else, because he's looked so good in the role that he would be playing. It's hard to ignore having a guy like him be able to come off the bench as well with how deep the pass rush could be if he's on the team. Having, obviously Roche's going to make the team as a draft pick. Having the top 3 guys that we already have, him and then Jones as that 5th rusher. We don't always do that, but I think it's important he's on the team.
Yeah, I
to
mean,
beat
I
those
think he'd even
teams.
be the 6 because they're still gonna have Cassius Marsh. That's the
I
thing.
honestly, I think that you can go ahead and tell Marsh that he can go.
Okay, all right, all right.
Personally,
No,
at
that
this
all
point,
right.
I don't see any upside with him. Right, like
Yeah,
I'd
no,
rather take the guy that's played well enough to justify a spot and also has potential for growth.
yeah. I mean, the Steelers have had a run here of guys who are lighting up the preseason and training camp as edge rushers, and then they kind of try to stash in the practice squad. And
Yeah, that's what I'm worried
we've
about.
had these problems with Ola Adaney, Tuzar
Mhm.
Skipper. I think there was one other guy I can't remember off the top of my head,
Yeah.
but I definitely think he's a guy that if he's on the practice squad, you have to be protecting him every week.
Yes, that's the thing is you'd have to protect him because there's with the way he's played. There's so many teams that have like depth issues at edge rusher or just
Yeah.
don't have solidified guys. I don't think it would take long for someone to be like, yeah, we'll bring him in to see what he can do.
Right,
So,
and he's been a really good special teams player as
That's
well.
the other thing, too.
So he brings that added value.
right.
For me, in terms of a guy, I kind of already talked about the wide receiver stuff.
Yep.
I'm kind of just looking down the roster here of guys. I guess kind of the other one would be like which defensive back is going to make that roster is
Yeah,
kind of
that's
the
tough,
special
too.
teams primary guy because we've seen Shakur Brown play really well in camp. He's had some decent plays up until last night
Yeah.
when he's playing on defense. A lot of other guys have made plays. Mark Gilbert has been really impressive as an older prospect, but he's quite good. Trey Norwood's going to make the roster, but he's been excellent.
He's
Donovan Steiner's had his moments. Lafayette Pitts has had his moments. So I think kind of looking at that back end of the defensive back depth chart is going to be interesting to see which guy can really elevate his play in the final game and maybe secure a job for the rest of the year.
All right, practice squad potential there too.
Yeah, for sure.
So.
Yeah, I think they're gonna. And on that note as well, defensive line is getting pretty tight too.
Yeah,
because like even though because like we've ragged on Loudermilk a lot here, but he's been playing except for the roughing the passer, which was they can't really do much about that.
He's a motor guy. That type of stuff happens
for sure. Yeah, but I think he's been impressive this training camp, which is this preseason, which has been good to see. But that's gonna do it for us for this episode. We're gonna be back maybe later this week. We'll see what news and notes come up.
Right.
See if there's anything interesting that we feel we need to talk about. But anyways, in the meantime, Shayne, where can people find you?
Again, at Shayne Kubas on Twitter. Definitely just make sure to put that Y in there, as I've said before. Otherwise, you'll find probably someone else that somehow has my name. And then you can also read my stuff both here at Around the Block and then also at Still Curtain.
Awesome. Yep. And I'm at Mitchell T. Wolfe, WOLFE. And like Shayne said, make sure you're following at Steelers_ATB on Twitter, where we'll be posting the podcast and other Steelers news. We really hope you've enjoyed our podcast so far, and we really hope to see you back again next week. Thanks for tuning in.